This is Every Widow Thing.
Welcome back, everyone, to Every Widow Thing. I'm Lacey, and I'm here with Holly, Kira, and Whitney.
Woo-hoo.
And we have a special guest today, Tim Wilschetz.
Yay!
A man in the room.
Hi, everyone.
A little testosterone amongst all this
That does not hurt.
I got to be totally honest here. Tim is actually a friend of mine, so I know a little bit of his story, but there's a lot I don't know. So he is a widower. His late wife, who I did not know, was Carol Buck. We wanted to have him on the podcast today because we kept looking at our Instagram and looking at the analytics of the show and realizing there are a lot of widowers that listen to us as well. So we want them to know that we see them as well. And I've seen Tim navigate this grief journey a little bit from afar. My son was friends with his son, and I've been amazed at how he's been able to raise two kids. And one of them is at UT Austin, and the other one is at UC Berkeley.
Well, I appreciate that. I was just talking to Kira about dropping off my son at Berkeley, and it's every event that you take part in is a first time, and it all is arguably easier with a spouse than it is by yourself.
Absolutely. I want to give you a little bit background on Tim because, I mean, he's had an amazing career, but so did Carol. Tim was a managing director at KPMG, and Carol was a managing director at BMO Capital Markets, and she worked up until 2 weeks before she died.
That's crazy.
That is unbelievable.
She was a tough one.
They have two wonderful children, as we said, and she was fighting cancer, pancreatic cancer, correct?
That's correct.
And I just think you can start with maybe how you guys met. I think there's there's a cute story there, and then maybe talk about the grief journey.
Yeah, well, thanks, Lacey. And I've listened to several of your sessions, and it's really helpful, I think. And even even being a man going through something similar to what you all have gone through, there's a lot to take that I was able to take away from those conversations. So I appreciate what you all are doing, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And now you're a part of it.
Yeah, I guess I am a part of it.
You're a token dude.
Like it or not, here I am.
was the token dude. Now you're going to be the token.
It's funny.
Tell us how you guys met.
Right after Carol had passed, by the way, I had a couple of friends that said, "Welcome to the club that nobody wants to belong to."
Exactly.
So I totally get it. So Carol and I, we had kind of a different journey maybe than a lot of other people, certainly a lot of people in Austin. So we met when we were 28 or 29. And then we didn't get married till we were 38.
Oh, wow.
So we met at Columbia University in New York. Both of us were interested in kind of a change of life, and we were making changes in our career, but we weren't really ready to settle down by any stretch. And we spent most of 10 years running around New York City as single people. And
that sounds amazing.
I loved it. I loved it.
Another episode needs to be all those stories.
That's a whole nother.
Good time. Can you tell them, Tim?
There are a set of sessions that we could go into, but we probably shouldn't do that in the opening session. But we had a lot of fun. And so Carol and I dated on and off for probably 6 or 7 years before we got married.
So why was it on and off?
I
feel like there's a story there.
There were relationships are complicated, and we would go out for a while, and then we would get involved with something else going on in our lives, and so we would kind of get become more distant. And then one entertaining story is actually Lacey knows I'm a runner. I've run since I was in junior high. It's what I do for kind of stress relief. So there were 3 different times over those years that I literally ran into Carol. I was running the streets of New York, which is what I always did, and I would run into her on dates at different places.
Oh, that is hilarious.
As I'm running down the street.
Dates. She's on dates and she's running.
She's in a cafe, sitting out on the sidewalk. I'm running. She was in Central Park having a disagreement with a boyfriend when I'm running by. So I chatted again, and I think she was like, she welcomed the interaction because you're like, oh, let's talk to this guy. So we had a lot of fun. Yeah, so we, on and off for a number of years, but we always came together, and we were always pretty tight. And so we got married in 1999. And then I was 37 or 38, and Carol was the same age as I was. And so we started our lives as a couple, when we were almost 40 years old. But
where did you get married?
So we got
You
married.
guys have lived everywhere.
So we got married. It was very funny because Carol grew up overseas. She was born in Lima, Peru, and then she went to high school in Colombia, in Bogota. She went to grade school in Nigeria. So she had lived all over the world. And ironically, we ended up getting married in Hot Springs Village, Arkansas, of all places. And then we honeymooned in Botswana.
Of course.
So we left Arkansas.
That was my second choice.
Way more interesting than we will ever be.
I know. I was like, when I was reading the bio, I was like, gosh, I'm boring.
So we had a lot of fun, and we both loved to travel. And we both traveled. Actually, one of the things we did when we would date on and off through the 90s is we would travel together. And so I went with her to Lima, and she showed me the place where she was born. Wow. I took her out to Canyonlands, and we did mountain biking and hiking and all that. So I showed her the States, and she showed me other places. So it was a lot of fun.
Was it New York? And then when did you move to Austin?
Yeah, we had our whole life there, and it really was a huge change when we came to Austin.
I bet.
But it was nice. We had, they had their cousins here.
So was that the reason you guys moved here? Was that because of family, or
that? And we moved her parents down from Hot Springs Village to Austin. And so the blessing in all this was that Carol was able to spend 3 years with all of her family for the first time since she was very small. Maybe the first time that they were all together, in Carol's lifetime.
Do you feel like that was a
no coincidences moment?
Yeah.
Exactly. I felt that way. And Carol asked, why did we come here? Because her view was the hospitals, she could have had a lot better medical attention in New York City or up in Boston and I said, look, things happen the way they happen. The good news is you're here and all your family's here.
Right.
And I think she felt that too.
And you got situated and settled before she left. I say left, transitioned, died, whatever people want to say. But I feel like it was a good 3 years before she got diagnosed where the kids got to have stability and root in this new town.
And you had all the support from family too, which is, well, why don't we go back a little bit and talk about like when she was diagnosed, like how old the kids were, and take us through, because there was a story about the diagnosis. You kind of touched on it the other day. Why don't you start there and see?
Yeah. So one of the things that we did, Carol and I always wanted to travel with the kids when they got older, when they got to the right age. And we wanted to do like international travels, like real travels in our minds, and show them different cultures and whatnot. But we knew they had to grow to a certain age before they could fully appreciate that. So we spent every summer and lots of spring breaks, we would go down to the Caribbean. And as I shared with Lacey, we traveled so many of the Caribbean islands. And
lucky them.
Which was it was a lot of fun for the kids. But there was one trip that we took in 2013. In the fall of 2013, when Carol had a lot of pains in her abdomen on the plane. And I could tell it was not characteristic of Carol. She clearly was in a lot of pain. And so not characteristic in the sense that she never would complain about it. But this particular time, you could tell that she was almost doubled over in the plane. So when we got to, I think it was St. Thomas, we found a medical facility. And they said, it was something she ate, it would all pass and it would be fine. But something didn't feel right about that. And it did. It went away, and we didn't think a lot more of it. At least I didn't. Carol may have. And so that was the first the indicator that something was going on. And that was like August of 2013, I think. And then she passed 2 years later. So when we got back to Austin, she wasn't feeling quite right. So she had a lot of tests done. And it turns out in January of 2014, so 3 or 4 months later, she had scans done of her abdomen, and it showed abnormalities. And it was kind of a strange thing that happened is that she got a call from the doctor's office one evening, And she was really excited because she said, great news. I got this abnormality in the scan, but they ruled out it being cancer. So she said, I dodged that bullet. And so it was like a little mini celebration with her and me that night. And we thought, we'll figure it out. We don't know what it is. Well, it turns out that was the problem that they had found in the scan. And it was 4 months later, it was in May, when finally the doctor said, we reevaluated and had done further scans and decided that you actually do have, at that point, she was stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
And so your brain, I would think, immediately goes to, if they had caught it sooner,
Exactly.
Right.
things would be very different.
That was Carol's. Carol was like, I knew it. And we should not be in Austin. We should have been in a metropolitan area where they had other facilities. So people that listen to this podcast can probably relate to this, that the greatest planning in the world or, kind of introspection doesn't really resolve your issues. I debate even now kind of the process we went through. And strange things happen along the way. And if you can believe it, the person who referred us to the right medical facility when we were here was the dermatologist. It was so strange. And this dermatologist, I won't name names, but she's here in Austin and she's fantastic. And she's become a personal friend.
Dermatology.
Her name is Jacqueline Dano, and she's fantastic.
I know her.
Do you?
Yeah,
and she's the one who said, she finally said to Carol, this is very symptomatic of pancreatic issues, and you need to go talk to this person. And we ended up going back again to the same practice that she had been, and only when she cycled back again because of Jacqueline Dano's direction did we have a reevaluation, and they finally said, yeah, this is the right conclusion. So, and I think in retrospect, you look back and you say, even if you'd have known that a year before, I don't think it would have changed much because pancreatic cancer is such a brutal disease. But, whether it would give her a little bit more, time, I don't know.
So once she was diagnosed and you knew for sure it was pancreatic cancer, what took place after that? I don't know how long.
Yeah.
But also what happened in terms of like when she was getting help. And I know you told me at one point she was at home when she died.
Yeah.
So can you take us through that process?
Strangest 18 months. So that was May of 2014 when she was diagnosed. And she was really tough. And so, we had, the first thing is you have like this, oh no, kind of what are we going to do? And you start trying to, make the phone calls and say, what do we do? And we knew a lot of doctors, and the immediate reaction was, get to MD Anderson, get help immediately, get into a trial if you can, and all this stuff. And your head's just swimming because you don't really know what to make of all this. Neither myself nor Carol had ever had a family member that had gone through anything like this. So kind of, all this through the first time. But one thing that happened is that while we were working on all that, we also, I look back at some photos to send over to you so you could see a little bit what Carol and the kids were, what we all, the environment we were living in at the time. And when I look back at Carol, it reminded me that what she said is like, look, I might not be around that long, so we should take a couple of good photos. And she did. She was very photogenic, and so she got dressed up. We took photos of her around the house and this and that. And those are priceless.
I love that you guys thought to do that.
Well, I didn't think to do that.
Well, how old were the kids?
And one thing I regret, Lacey, is that we never had, and somebody told me this later, I think Carol's sister told me later, how come you guys never had a family portrait done? We never did. We don't have a single photo of the four of us, Emily, Daniel, Carol, and me. We don't have a single good photo. And it's a shame, but I can piece together all the different photos and say, yeah, this was our life, but we never did that. You would appreciate it. So her immediate reaction was, get a good photo of me before you can appreciate before I lose my hair, before I get skinny, before I do this, and all those things did transpire over the 18 months. But thankfully, I've got good photos of her kind of throughout her process, and only somebody who goes through this can appreciate. The photos I like the best are the last ones when she actually didn't look so good to most people. She looked beautiful to me. But that's a whole nother story.
It's funny. I only took one. So my husband died I say suddenly, but he pretty much died at home, but then he was revived and had several days in the hospital. I was very adamant about nobody taking any pictures in the hospital. And I even sent one to a friend of mine because I was like debating on whether or not to have the kids come up. And I was like, I'm going to send you this photo of Hunter and you tell me if it's too shocking for the kids, but you have to delete it. You have to delete it right away. Like, I don't want this out here. And she was like, okay. And now I have one picture of me holding his hand that I took. And it's just our hands. And I have that. And I don't have any other pictures. And now I'm sad. When I was in that deep grief, I did not want any memory of it.
Well,
and
when you're
now
in
I'm kind
it,
of sad that I don't have it.
So when I say that she became more beautiful over time, to me it was when you take those photos, you no longer are staging the photo. You're just taking a natural photo because at some point the person that's going through this, at least my experience was, she didn't care that much more. She didn't care about so much what she was wearing or what the setting was. She was just happy in the moment.
Yeah,
so
you're stripping away, and we talk about this just when you lose someone. It strips away all the things that you spend so much time and energy on
that are a waste of time.
That don't matter. That don't matter. And like even as moms, we've been told, make sure to get in the picture sometimes, even if you don't like how you look. Because when you go back through your photo albums and stuff, the mom is never in the photo because she's always the one taking the picture or no. But those are valuable memories.
Funny, I might have one or two photos of Carol and me together, but you're exactly right.
Yeah.
I was taking the photos.
Because he's not a selfie guy, I can't imagine.
Yeah. Well, I hope that has changed.
That was a funny story, actually, about I'm kind of digressing a little bit. But Carol told me one time, I remember this back, I don't know, it was probably 10 years ago. Maybe it was longer now. It must have been longer. I came home from work one day and she goes, have you heard of something called a selfie?
Oh, hilarious.
She goes, it's a big thing with the kids, so don't act surprised when your kids take selfies. I'm like, what? What's a selfie? So,
oh, that's funny.
So
Tim and I were talking before just to kind of get some background. We try not to get too many answers to the questions because we want to hear it the first time like our audience does. But you were talking about your relationship as time went on through her illness, and you said you guys got closer.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that process, like what that looks like when you have time to talk about things and prepare as best as anybody can
I
prepare.
will.
No one can prepare, but a little bit.
I'll tell you about that, but if I get a little choked up, that's just going to be the way it's going to happen. Like going back through the process again.
Do you spend more time thinking about it, or do you actually try to live life in the moment and not think, how does it work? And what did she do for the kids maybe that, my kids didn't get to say goodbye. They don't have any like notes with their dad's handwriting.
Daniel was, I think, 11, and Emily had just turned 14 when Carol died. Mm-hmm. So she was born in October. Carol died in November of 2015. And Daniel was 11, but they were 10 and 10 and 13 when Carol was diagnosed. And so those were kind of tough times because Carol and I had a lot of conversations about how much we share with the kids. And the immediate conclusion was, even though we talked about it frequently, the conclusion was we got to share everything with them because, what
they're going through it too.
Right. And what are we going to hold back? And then Carol dies. And then what am I going to say? Like, well, maybe I should have shared more with you.
And they can feel it in the room. Even if nothing is said, they know that something's going on.
They know.
And that's a whole nother set of conversations because when I moved the kids to different schools after Carol had died, which Lacey knows about, to be together on the same campus, they didn't tell any of their friends for 2 years that they didn't have a mother.
My kids the same way.
Mine were the same way.
They just wanted to be like all the other kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Would you call people and tell them on the sly? Like I would sometimes, my kids were a little bit younger, but I would, when they were going to go to a sleepover or something, I would be like, hey, I don't know if they mentioned, but this is what we're going through.
Yeah, I would just
did
give a
that.
heads up because
they're not talking
about it.
Kids
don't want to. Yeah, they don't want to be defined by it.
So before Carol died, we had a whole different set of rules.
Sure.
After Carol died, I'm with you, Kira, that I had conversations and let parents know what was going on for the most part. But I also didn't want to interfere with the kids' lives. And so I didn't want necessarily a mother to know. and then say something to her son, only to have my son be surprised that he already knows.
Yeah.
So it's you walk a fine line.
Such a fine dance.
Yeah.
I don't even
It
know.
is.
Like, I mean, who knows if we handled it right? We just did what we
I'm so
did.
glad they're older now, because that was a complicated thing to maneuver when
It
they were
is.
young.
Well,
for
I will
sure.
say this, there is no right way. You make the best decisions that you can for yourself and your kids in that moment, and you do it out of love. And that's all we can do. There is no right answer. I say all the time, we are all fucked up. I mean, every parent, whether they're, my kids had a parent die, but I have tons of friends who have both parents and they still got problems. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no perfect
There is no get out of
parenting.
jail free card.
Exactly.
I always
There's
say
no
it's going to be
everybody's
tough no matter
damaged.
what.
By the way, Tim, I cuss sometimes. I apologize.
I picked that up. So before Carol died, I was the one saying, no swearing in the house, no, trying to keep limits on things. And then like, why can't you be like, Mom, come on, Dad? And so then after she was gone, it's horrible for 2 kids to be left with only the not fun parent. So that's what they got. And what I found is that over time, I figured out how to be a little bit more of both, but it's hard because you can never let the strict side of raising the children go. You have to have that side. And if it turns into just like, okay, let's just do the best we can and all have a lot of fun for the next 5 years and then you go off to college, that's not going to be a good way to raise the kids. I don't think. It's really interesting because Carol, our identities were tied very closely to our work, to our jobs, but she loved working and she loved the Bank of Montreal and doing that work. And so when we moved to Austin, she actually decided she was going to retire. She was 50 years old. We had these conversations and said, okay, now is the time to leave and we'll go spend time with our kids in Austin and we'll do something completely different. And to their credit, Bank of Montreal came back and said, we don't want you to resign. Would you want to work part-time from Austin?
Wow, that's
So Carol set up an office in our house and she had the Bloomberg terminals there and she could trade and sell and do all the stuff that she did in New York. The whole kind of period between the diagnosis and her death, she did not want any changes to her work environment. And she felt very strongly that she didn't want her colleagues to know anything about it. So she never told her colleagues she was sick.
Oh, wow.
And when she would have to travel periodically to New York, and until about 6 months before she died, you couldn't really tell because she hadn't lost her hair. She went through rounds of chemotherapy, but she lost weight, but she would kind of gain weight back again, and she was able to manage her appearance in the way that I think people suspected, my guess is, but nobody really knew. And she kept working, and so she worked all the way up to 2 weeks before she died. Which was crazy. And she would just make her way from the bedroom to her office, shuffling through the kitchen. And then she would do her call. And then she would take a nap. And then she would, make calls to, some of her accounts. Her
How did
sales
that
accounts.
make you feel? Like, were you upset
No,
by
it's
that
like,
because
go
you
for
wanted
it.
more time with her and she
No,
was...
the opposite.
Yeah.
It was
You were like, you do you. I bet. You were like, you do exactly.
Carol
what
was
you want to do.
adamant. She wanted me to travel. You need to keep your job going. The kids need to have their normal lives. And so she wanted everything as normal as possible. And frankly, until, 2 months before she died, she was still hopeful that we would figure out a way out of this thing. And so the last thing she wanted is everybody to destroy their lives, uproot everything, and then only to find ourselves coming through the other side. And then you got, kind of reset everything.
So that is a great point because when I think of people who, like your wife, Carol, who was diagnosed and had 18 months, there's a part of my brain that's like, okay, so for 18 months, she was planning her death and getting everything in order. But no, you're fighting to live.
Mm-hmm. Carol had researched a group at LSU that was supposedly at the time, if you could look back at the time, there was immunotherapy was a new thing. And so it was and that was all the talk in the cancer research community was there's this new immunotherapy possibility and so Carol had researched and discovered a practice in Baton Rouge that might be able to help her out. So she was able to get an appointment. It took months to get that appointment, a couple months. But we took her at the end of September, and that was a brutal trip. And she was in tough shape at that point. So we went there, and we had that appointment. And you could tell. We spent an hour with the doctor, and he said, I'm going to call you this week, and we'll figure out next steps. And this was like the end of September, right at 8 weeks before she died, 7 weeks before. And what happened is when we left, we came back to Austin, and she waited a week and hadn't heard. So she called, no return call. Then she called again, not the following week, no return call.
Wow.
They never called her back.
What?
They never called her back. And I felt, for me, the husband, I'm like, is there anything worse? Like, when your spouse is dying and you know she is, and she knows she is, and they won't even call her back. So they kind of just like, final nail in the coffin, right?
Right.
And so we knew that the clock was ticking.
So then what shifts once you know that?
The only thing different that happened really was lots of conversations. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed and just having these really intense conversations. And that's why I said to Lacey, you get to know somebody so well when you think you know them really well, but you start having conversations about little things that happen to them early in their lives, or whatever it may be. So sorry, I get a little choked up when I talk too much about this. You end up getting to know the details of somebody's life really well. And so on the one hand, it's a beautiful thing. It really is to understand somebody so well. On the other hand, after they're gone, it's just like, how that was. It's like uprooted. And you're the only one who knows all those things. There's nobody to share them with.
Right.
And so at that point, like all the inside jokes or the, whatever it may be.
The birth of your children.
Everything.
I mean, the simple things like that in your wedding day. Only the two of
the
you know
memories.
those things.
Yeah. And you know so much more about,
Very
I knew
difficult.
so much more about her just from that last 2 or 3 months of those conversations. And yet all that stuff is just like, then you're just like, you're
Left
the
with
only
it.
person in the world that knows those things. And you always will be. And that, I find that really hard. And I won't share a lot of those things with my kids because those are only things that their mother should have shared. It's not for me to share some of those things. It's like, she could have told them. They know what they know about their mother and from their mother. But it's not on me to say, oh, did you know your mother did this? And, she might have regretted it or not regretted it. So I find myself always walking that fine line with how much of these conversations do you share with the kids?
Yeah, that is an interesting thought because you had those moments where, like you said, she could have shared those things with her children. We're left with we didn't get they didn't know, our husbands didn't know they were leaving. They didn't have moments with their kids knowing that. So I'm always trying to share stuff so that they know who their dad was. So it's interesting to hear your philosophy.
These were like gifts from her to you, maybe in a way.
Life lessons. Like there are things you talk about that, I wish I wouldn't have done this, right? And now I know something that she was not proud of, that she did. Well, that could be a helpful thing for Emily to know, for my daughter to know. It's not really on me to say, like, here's a dumb thing your mother did or something she was ashamed of.
I do think if there's a certain situation where that story would be helpful, then that would be a good time to share it.
Because you don't want them to be raised thinking their mother was a perfect person. You know what I mean? Because we tend to kind of do that about the
pedestal.
dead. I didn't want Ryder to think he's got to live up because he said, yeah, my dad's so smart. I hear that all the time. And I said, wait a minute. So let me tell you some things that he did. And I think it helped him understand he's a real human being.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's funny, Lacey, you don't want to take the varnish off either. They have this image of their mother, in your case of Oliver, and you don't want to say like, he actually wasn't the person you think he was. Right. So I don't want. So I want that. Well, yeah. It's for me. It's situation by situation.
Sure.
Yeah. I think it's a fine dance.
I mean, I think for sure, if it comes up down the road, I mean, like my oldest just turned 21, and my one of my husband's best friend that knew Toby when he was 21 went out. We went out for drinks for his 21st birthday, and Kenny was telling Gabe stories about his dad, the stupid things they did in college when he was 21, which was, he was dying laughing. It was perfect. But I would never have told him these things before that.
Right.
So,
well, I don't know if you all have had the conversations. I'm sure you have about did you smoke when you were in college? Did you drink when you were in college? What all kinds of details where the kids are trying to figure out what is going to be acceptable to my parents and what's going to be considered unacceptable. Well, I know exactly what Carol did in college, right? But who am I to say, well, you won't believe what your mother did when she was
Right.
But I would hope someone would share, like, if I was not here, I would hope my son would see me as a real human being. I made mistakes. I'm not perfect. It gives him license to not be perfect either.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think if we tell them they're so perfect that they got to live up to something that doesn't exist, we're all human. But you're right. I think it's a fine dance on what the story is and when it's the appropriate time to tell them.
And the funny thing is, I think if Carol was here, she wouldn't be bashful about sharing the story. She wouldn't really care. Carol would say, smoke a joint if you want to smoke a joint. I don't know if I can say that on the podcast.
Yeah,
but
of course
the kids are like,
often.
can I smoke? And I'm like, well, did mom? Did you? Right? And so
did you inhale?
You do honor her by a foundation that you created. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. After Carol passed, which I'm sure you all went through as well, is you have those thoughts and conversations with people about what do you want your life to be for the rest of your time. I began to think about some kind of a legacy that we could do that would be helpful, not just for honoring Carol, but for helping the kids understand how they might make use of their own tragedy to help some other people.
Put some
in the
meaning
future.
into it.
Exactly. So my advisor at UBS, who was extremely helpful, John McManus is his name. He's a great guy. He's the one that introduced me to the concept. They work with somebody called Foundation Source, based in Connecticut, who runs foundations. It's one of the largest family foundation administrators in the country. They might be the largest. And we worked with them to put together a family foundation. And we named it after Carol, the Carol A Buch Foundation. We do three things. We do education, in whatever form. We leave that to be defined. We do community assistance in whatever form we decide makes sense. And then we do kind of invest in cancer research, although we haven't been as active there. We try to use the foundation to invest in things that we also are hands-on participants with. I took the kids to Kenya 5 years ago. Was involved with a group called Well Aware, fantastic group here in Austin. We did a couple well drills. The kids stayed at a place called International Peace Initiatives, IPI, which is an AIDS orphanage in Meru, Kenya. And they got to know some of these orphans there. And they actually have kept in touch through social media with these kids. Unbelievable. Wow. And so we try to figure out ways that not just to give money to people, but to actually do things that are either inspirational to Emily or Daniel or me, or that we can actually participate in through trips or whatever it might be. We could have a whole session on the benefits of a foundation.
Well, I do want to ask quickly. So it sounds like, because I know that was one of the things that I thought of a year or two after Hunter died, but then you kind of go, I don't know what to do. You found a place in Connecticut that helps people create family foundations?
Exactly. Foundation Source is the name.
Okay. So someone could just call them up and be like, I'm thinking about that I want to do this. Can you help me?
Absolutely.
And you even gave us the name.
Yeah.
These are great. That's why we always say give a shout out, because these are things that our community they can contact those people themselves and maybe do something.
Yeah, they're fantastic. Yeah. What I learned, Lacey, is it's hard to do it all yourself. And so I had advisors. So I had somebody at UBS. I had somebody, like I said, I had a law firm, and I had an accountant to help me out with that. And without them, I don't know if I could have put that foundation together like that.
I don't even have the knowledge. That's why I love that there's a foundation that does that.
I know.
I don't even have the knowledge of how that
when I
works.
read about you, I was like, how do you have time to do all that? I'm just like getting up out of bed.
I was like
so
I just had my coffee. I don't know about the whole
did I get to the
Well, we have a
grocery
couple of minutes left. Are there any other questions that anybody has before we?
Thousands, but
did you have a question? What?
I was just curious. I mean, this might be more involved for the last 2 minutes, but I was curious about your support, like your close inner support group, because I was interested in what that looked like for a man as opposed to a woman, where, I had a lot of moms in my corner, a lot of girlfriends. And I would think for a dad, it might be a little trickier because maybe you're not as involved with the play dates and some of the kids' activities.
Totally tricky. It was crazy.
And how do you navigate that as a dad?
So I was really fortunate. My in-laws lived here in Austin, and so they were really, really helpful for me. But it was
you had family here.
And
I didn't have any family here. I know she does.
I don't.
She does.
And I became a part of the mothers group. So they would refer to me as one of the mothers, and I was like a father and a mother. I don't think you have to be female to be a mother. I'm not sure. But I debated that in my own mind. Do I need to be a female?
Were you able to talk about it? Like, I know women are just usually more open with their feelings and crying and all of that. Did you feel that you had to be this strong man, or did you feel...
I just didn't talk about it.
Yeah, you didn't talk about it.
Men don't talk much.
I
Men
agree.
talk about baseball or football, and
That
know.
had to
Sorry
be
for
hard.
guys.
That had to be hard for you.
Well,
Therapy then for yourself? Were you talking anywhere? Or
I joined Emily's therapy. So Emily has we met. We found a person that was very good for my daughter, and my son hasn't really done therapy, and I eventually ended up joining the sessions with Emily, with the therapist. And I got to be very good friends with the therapist. And I've done one session recently on my own, which was like, I felt like I graduated. Because Emily was like, you need to go do that. So I finally
Good for you to be open to it.
Yeah.
I love that. And
one last quick question.
Yes.
Dating. Are you?
I
have
knew she was
you?
going to ask it.
Will you? Do you? Yeah.
All right, I'll
quick.
put it out there. I haven't dated anybody for 25 years.
Okay. Yeah. Because
Are you open to it?
I don't even know what it is anymore.
Yeah,
I knew what it was in New
you?
York City. I don't
Does
know
the
what it
idea of
is.
swiping right or left just like bother you?
It doesn't. It's not my thing.
Your
It's
son
fine.
will get you
It's probably the
online.
wrong thing to say.
Sounds
in
like
this.
Daniel will get you
No,
on
we're
that.
of the same.
My
we feel
kids
the
are
same
all
way.
over me. I want to say thanks for having me on, and I want to apologize. I get a little choked up now and then, so you're gonna have
Honey,
to just
we
like
all
excuse
cry.
that.
Apology necessary.
You know,
I like that.
One
Tears
thing
for
I told
fears.
Lacey is
Tears for
I always thought there was a 3-year time frame. At the end of 3 years, you're supposed to come out the other side.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't
No
happen
way.
that
There's
way.
no time
No.
frame.
I'm 7.5 years in, and I'm still like,
Okay. Well, I lied. One more question. Are you on social media?
I'm not. You know,
Okay.
I never even got a Facebook account.
I know we all have had like widow fetish guys like come in like, I'm sure if you were on social media, I was gonna ask.
Happened to me.
That
yet.
really hasn't happened to me
Okay.
either.
And
Maybe
we're
just
out of
Whitney,
time.
But we're out of time. I think we're good.